George Soros and the silver moonshot. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. Hello, John.
Hello, Martin. How are you going today?
Yeah, pretty good. Now, I'm guessing that people will hear George Soros and run for the hills.
Well, that potentially could be the case. Mr. Soros nowadays is highly unpopular because of some of his political activities, but there is a real economic lesson to be learnt from some of the activities, some of the investment activities that George Soros has done, and so I definitely think it's worthwhile to cover something that George Soros was involved in 1992 when he broke the Bank of England, and how does that actually apply to the silver market?
And I think it's worth saying, John, that whatever your position is vis-a-vis silver, right, there is a spotlight here which is relevant to the broader economy and the financial markets and how they operate and how they're manipulated more generally, right? I mean, my position with silver is very different to yours, but nevertheless, some of the insights that we're going to touch on are pretty scary if you apply it more generally too.
Indeed. So what I want to do first, Martin, is that, so I just want to put slide one up on the screen for our audience. So when we think about a basic market, so basic economic theory, we have demand and the law of demand, and we have supply, the law of supply. And when demand and supply meet, you have equilibrium, and you have an equilibrium price, and you have an equilibrium quantity. And that's what should happen in a free market. And that's the most basic understanding of the market system. No matter which sort of economic textbook that you pick up, I mean, it is the core essence of what is economics, and obviously this was first written at length in the 18th century by Adam Smith when he talked about the wealth of nations. So that's what the basic market looks like. Now, if we go to slide 2, let's just put that on the screen. I've got it here in front of me. So we've got a situation where you can have market distortions. So governments can distort markets, and then you have corporations and central banks that they can distort markets, and then sometimes through financial fraud, markets can be distorted. Now, for first year microeconomics, you learn about something very basic called price ceilings and price floors. A price ceiling is where a price is not allowed to go above a certain point, and a price floor is where a price is not allowed to go below a certain point. Now, if a price floor, so let's just consider this thing. So if a price floor is above equilibrium, so basically the free market says the price of a commodity should be a certain price, but the price is actually above that price, and it's not allowed to go towards its natural market price. Well, what happens in the market? You have an excess of supply, and then you have some market distortions that happen in that sort of situation. Now, on the flip side, if you have a price ceiling below equilibrium, so basically the price is below what it should be, and for whatever reason the price can't go above a certain level, well, then you have another form of distortions. It's called excess demand. And basically, sometimes, for example, governments may, I think Richard Nixon in the 1970s had wage and price controls. Sometimes, for example, when you had hyperinflation in 2008 in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe used price controls to control the price of food. So we've seen, even in some of the commentary that you and I have done about the property market, I mean, one could say that the price of property vis-a-vis monetary policy, the price of property is basically, there's a price floor under the property market. So basically, the consequences of property falling to its real value is so significant to the economy that the central banks won't allow. So they basically, run these extraordinary economic stimulus policies to effectively cement a price floor under the property market. And that's something that you and I have talked about. So price ceilings and price floors, these are common tactics that are used by governments for public policy reasons, and they tend to end up in making things worse from an economic point of view. But also central banks and a whole bunch of corporate entities have been involved in rigging markets in one form or another. And when you hear about a market that's being rigged, typically you're talking about either a price floor or a price ceiling. And that creates problems in those markets, but it also creates opportunities. And in 1992, George Soros saw a massive opportunity using this basic concept, and that's how he broke the Bank of England. And I think there's a similar opportunity in the silver market. But before we talk about George Soros, any comments from you, Martin?
Well, yes, just to say, of course, that what we're talking about here are large players with financial muscle, or governments or reserve banks or central banks with muscle, who are able to essentially manipulate the markets by buying or selling vast quantities or setting the price or whatever, or otherwise controlling the price, so that effectively free market conditions don't apply. And as soon as free market conditions don't apply, then whatever the price is not what the natural price is.
Correct. Now, one of the key points, Martin, is that when you have a distorted market, and then the market becomes free, well, what happens to the price?
Yep.
The price goes in a very dramatic fashion towards whatever the equilibrium price is. So, for example, if we stopped this extraordinary, in terms of the economic stimulus that we're running at the moment, and the property market crashed, well, what would happen to? Well, sorry. What I should say is, if we had the extraordinary economic stimulus, so if that was to stop, what would happen to property? It would crash to its equilibrium price. So it's being held up by all the stimulus. If the stimulus stops, it will crash, and that's where our forecasts, some of our forecasts of debt thesis, about a 40-50% crash in the market. I mean, this is on the basis that these distorted policies and this distorted price level will come to an end, and the market will go to its free market value, and the price of property is way below what it is currently in terms of the moment. Now,
sorry, John, it's worth saying, therefore, what we're actually saying is that when you're thinking about economics, right, supply demand, you've also got to be thinking then about the political and economic levers that regulators and governments and banks are likely to use to get to their own ends, which may well have nothing to do with price equilibrium.
Of course, yes. So absolutely. If any market is manipulated, there's a reason why they did it, and typically, if it's in their interest to continue the manipulation, they will try to perpetuate that until the situation becomes unbearable.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, just to build on that, John, that the longer it goes on and the further from, if you like, the free market price the conditions are, the more difficult it is to perpetuate the mismatch.
Correct. Yeah, yes. So absolutely right. The longer it goes on, the greater the distortions. It's harder to continue it on. Now, obviously, what we just said before is that once these manipulations or these price controls stop, and the price goes towards equilibrium, if you are positioned correctly in that particular market, whatever that market is. So Soros, he looked at the situation and he realized that the real value of the pound was a lot lower than what this exchange rate mechanism trading range was. And he basically thought to himself, well, if the pound falls to its natural level, this is going to create an enormous opportunity to make a lot of money. So he placed 3 bets about the pound collapsing. And so there's a number of documentaries which even the BBC have put together about this particular day.
Watch out, excuse me.
5 years ago today, the government faced one of the biggest financial crises in history.
It was incredible. You can hear wave after wave of selling hitting the market.
It was a day when the Bank of England lost billions and speculators made fortunes.
It was in excess of $1 billion of profits.
lost 15%.
A day of disaster from which the government never recovered.
It was quite clear the government was not in charge of events.
I had no doubt we were in the middle of quite the biggest political crisis that I could remember.
But I think the purpose of the show is to really just provide a very basic explanation of a very basic microeconomic concept that you learn in first year microeconomics. Show that Soros made $1 billion in 1992, so that's in 1992 dollars, not in 2021 dollars. But he made more than $1.3 billion by collapsing a price floor and breaking the Bank of England. And that same basic concept, I believe, can be applied into the silver market. And the question is, can this manipulation be broken? We will have to see. There's millions of people around the world who are now learning this story, and we've seen a pickup in both wholesale and retail demand in the last 4 weeks as more people buy physical silver. There's an attempt to engineer this.
Yeah, and John, just to underscore, what we're talking about in the context of silver, I believe, is fundamentally true for many other financial markets too. And that's one of the reasons why the pools of derivatives around the world, the bond markets, the stock markets, the gold markets as well, they are all under a degree of manipulation. And that means that you can't trust the price because the price doesn't give you the full story.